Thank you so much, Toby. My name is Ray Stevenson. I'm here leading developer relations at Cisco. Before I go into the slides, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I actually worked in software for most of my career, so coming to Cisco was a very different experience. It's all about hardware with some software mixed in. I wrote code in Perl and Python and Smalltalk and C++ in my early career, did a lot of software design and architecture. I worked at Microsoft for 20 years. And I'm really happy to be at Cisco. I've been here about a year and a half, leading the developer relations team. So, the frontier for innovation is really expansive. If you think about all the things that are software-based and how they've been made over time, it's really whatever the imagination of the developer is, or the imagination of an entrepreneur. If it can be made in software, then they make it in software. And you think about all the things that surround us in life, all of these things are software driven. Our device in all of our pockets, pretty much everything that is in our house, including things that seem very simple, like a microwave oven. But all those things are driven by software. And I think for Cisco, looking at software through the lens of how do we help people to tie business metrics back to that software and observe what's happening between the interactions of different APIs is an opportunity where we have a lot of strength, because Cisco has traditionally owned the network and is the backbone of the internet. If you think about innovation, and you think about someone like Ada Lovelace, she actually was one of the first programmers. And what's amazing about her is that she actually wrote an algorithm for a piece of equipment that hadn't been invented yet. She knew what that machine would do, but she thought about how to write the code for that machine, but it didn't yet exist when she wrote this. And today, similarly, if you think about quantum computing, it's the same kind of situation. The programmers are already thinking about how do I create a programming language that can handle qubits instead of zeros and ones. This computer doesn't quite exist yet, but they know it will be there, and they're already anticipating what does a programming language have to look like in order to take advantage of a new model of programming. But there's still a lot of challenges for developers. If you think about what developers do, it's kind of an art. I mean, you could say it's engineering. You know, it's software engineer is sometimes how it's described. But if you talk to software engineers, they often say what they do is art, because they're being very creative about putting things together and coming up with technology and innovation that they might not have considered in the very beginning. So, and in the past, what they typically had to do is they would write that code and then they would pass it off to someone who would test it, and that would be kind of throwing it over the wall. So running the software is someone else's job, creating the software is their job. But today, even if you think about the engineering teams that I've actually had to manage, it's not quite like that. There's a very close connection between the people writing the code, the people who are actually taking that code and putting it into a staging environment, and then moving it into production. So the site reliability engineers, DevOps, they're all together in the same team, and they talk to each other. So they're actually saying, it's not just a piece of code running in an environment and then going to production. They're actually looking at it from all the perspectives of, is this something that can operate over the long term, rather than just some code that I was handed and it's just my job to make sure it stays up. And at the same time, they also have organizational challenges. Every business today is really a software business. Even if your business is hospitals, or your business is making cars, cars have become effectively computers on wheels. There's very little in today's modern car that someone who trained in mechanics would actually recognize. There's not a lot that they could do. It's just driven by software. And so you see that every company is thinking about, how do I take software to improve my margins, my bottom line, in every aspect of my business, even if my business isn't technology. From the Cisco perspective, these are three areas that we're actually focusing on quite strongly. You've heard a lot about observability this week if you've been going to these sessions or seeing some of the demos over there in the cloud native innovation space. The DevNet zone is over there in the hub. And observability is the idea that you can see what's going on between a bunch of services, a bunch of code, and tie that back to metrics that are not just about performance, but they also might be about the business value of those things not working, or the business value of them working better. Transforming infrastructure is another area where you want to make sure that as companies start to retire data centers and move those workloads from perhaps owned environments to things in the cloud, and sometimes back again. They need to be able to observe what's going on so that if something goes wrong or there's some kind of outage, they can quickly have a plan in place to recover and keep continuity going for their business and for their customers. And then finally, the third thing that I want to put on here that we actually care quite a bit about is world-class APIs. So if you're a software developer and someone asks you to develop an API, you might just say, well, I just need to have a handshake. Someone's going to ask for something, I'm going to give them something back. But ideally, you would go beyond that, and you would take the best practices of developers who came before you and think about, how do I design that API so that it lives a long time? And if I have to change something in the future, I don't break all the clients of that API that already came before. And so in developer relations at Cisco, we're actually focused on world-class APIs and API quality as one of our initiatives inside Cisco, but also something that we can share outside of Cisco. And APIs, they matter quite a bit. In the old days, you would use a library to write some code and create some kind of functionality, and it had an API, but it was just something that you used locally on your local machine. These days, almost everything is provided as an API, usually as a service out there on the web, on the cloud, and developers don't write a lot of the kind of core code that they use for their solution. They just go find an API that already does it, and that's how they go. But again, if you think about API quality, there's APIs and there's APIs that are better. And so you want to make sure that you're not creating APIs that make it hard for other people inside your company or people who consume it from the outside to come along with you as you make changes over time. So you can go from unreliable, where you're pretty much just not thinking about it, to evolving and starting to have versioning and starting to think about, what are the aspects that make a big difference to someone when they're consuming an API? And this, again, is part of our API quality initiative. Some other challenges, as I said, the skills gap. If you've never written an API for consumption by others, it's a challenge to say, well, what's the right way to do it? You might make some choices, and they might be good ones, but they might not be good ones. It's hard to say. Internal to your company, there are APIs that people use. So there might be a commerce API at your company that is how billing and licensing is done. That has to be used by all the people across the company. If you change your license model, you now have to change your internal API. And if you think about what's happening at these companies, they have to keep building these things because they keep getting asked by their customers and their partners, like, hey, I'm reselling your stuff, but I need to have access to the data that is being produced from that commerce stream. And so the growth in APIs is explosive across all areas and all types of companies. And I think a hot area for someone who's a software developer and wants to think about, what else could they do besides just writing code for one purpose. And our journey has actually been a long one. Back in 2016, we actually created an advisory group where we worked with our different engineering teams to make sure that we could get some feedback on what would make a good style guide for Cisco. Then we kept going, used that style guide to drive further discussions inside of the company. And then our API architect, who's actually Stev, he's back here in the back, actually started to work with all the different engineering teams to try to get them to all get on board with this idea of producing high-quality APIs that can be consumed not just between the different groups, but also outside of Cisco. And then finally, in 2021, you can see that we had exec alignment, where it was prioritized as a strategy that we want to make sure that we produce great quality APIs, and we're now at the implementing stage in 2022, and now, of course, we're at 2023. And last fall, we actually announced backward compatibility commitments at the Partner Summit with a select group of Cisco product groups. And the idea is that we have to put a stake in the ground somewhere where we say, this is what Cisco's going to do to make sure that as the partner community and the end developer community start to use the data that comes out of Cisco devices, they have some assurance that there's quality underneath and that they're getting something that isn't going to break when we release it in the future. So part of that so-called API first strategy is to treat it as if it is a product and it is a version. And you don't want to have anything stop working just because technology advanced. So along those lines, in our effort to try to do all that work that's involved in taking a look at APIs and understanding the quality and the differences over time, we actually created a product called API Insights for internal use. There's actually an open source version as well. And we're going to have Ryan here in a minute come up and give you a demonstration of how it works. There's an early adopter group of products here inside of Cisco. But this really helps people to understand in an automated way what's going on across version to version to version. And this was an effort between not only just inside of our own team, but also between Cisco, ET&I, the Emerging Technology and Innovation, and the Cisco Customer Experience teams. Here's the key features, but Ryan's going to demonstrate it, so I think that'll be more important for you to see that. But what it really does is it does static analysis over the code and lets you provide some level of API governance. And you can do other things as well. One of the ways that you can use it is to do language inclusivity. And I don't know if we're going to demo that, but if you don't have time here, you can certainly go to the DevNet zone, and we'd be happy to show you how this works. So with that, I'm going to bring Ryan up. Here's just a quote from one of our product managers. API Insights really helps inside of Cisco, and we want to make sure that it helps other people outside of Cisco as well. So, Ryan.
Deal.
Let's see what it does.
Yeah, let's do this. Boom. Well, hey. Hi, everybody. My name is Ryan Rose. I'm a director here at Cisco. And first, before I start, can I ask how many of you are members at developer.cisco.com? That's great. Stars to every one of those hands that went up. And if you have not signed up, this is your moment. Because if there's one thing that we do at DevNet is we always try to enable you. So I'm going to be talking about a tool that's available for free, but DevNet accounts are available for free. So you can sign up and start using all of our tools and training today. So just as Ray said, I'm going to be going over API Insights here. Now, I only have 5 minutes to really give a demo, but if you'd like to go in depth, you can actually engage any member of our team in the DevNet zone, or come to developer.cisco.com/API-insights, and you can find all of this that I'm going to be going through online. So API Insights is that open source tool that Ray was just talking about, to help anyone that is building or consuming APIs be able to build or create better APIs, and also to see things like breaking changes, help to ensure things like backward compatibility, and also through the combination of other open source tools, actually pull in more information on your APIs. So this is the API Insights dashboard. And what's really great about this is it provides a lot of information at different levels of accessibility. So if I was just a part of a team that wanted to just find out very quickly, what is the overall health score of this API experience? Each one of these APIs that's on this dashboard actually has its own score. And that's being judged against 34 parameters that we have that are inside of the tool. And it also then allows me to go deeper. So if I'm working, for example, on a DevOps team, or I'm working on a development team and I want to learn more about the API itself, I can actually click in to find results. But I always think this tool works better when we're able to kind of put it in a real world scenario. So let's say this is the developer relations store. It's a store where we sell a lot of different clothes, a lot of different things. Maybe, and again, I'll preface this by saying these clothes are actually not available in the DevNet zone. So if you do want to buy a gift, unfortunately, we are not selling these. So let's say that this store is powered by 5 microservices, and I want to make an update to the catalog API to provide greater amounts of personalization. So I go into the API right now, and right at the start, I can actually see the versions that I've worked on this catalog API. And I can see that right now, the score of this API is 100. And I can click, and I can view the report on this API. I can actually find out anything that's tied to it. But what I want to do here is when I go to the catalog API, let's say I've made that change. I've added personalization in, and now what's happened is the score has dropped. I've introduced a problem while I was working on that API. And this is what I mean by we can now empower developer teams who are working on their APIs to immediately find out if they've introduced a problem like a breaking change. So what I can do is I can actually compare those two versions of that API. And when I do that, see it loading right here, I can actually see exactly what happened between the two versions of the API to be able to see that there's been a breaking change that's been introduced. And when I actually go in, I can see this difference directly in the code. It's highlighted. So the issue here is the max length has actually been changed here and the ID to maximum. So you can actually see the differences between the two sides of the code. You can actually see the issue, the type, string, the type, number. This is where I've introduced this massive error actually directly into the code, and that's what's causing this score to fall. So I can go even further, and I can view a full report of this API and see all of what is making up this score up above. 90, 98, 80, 93. I can see all of the individual markers that I'm looking for in this API health. And so I can see that I have errors, for example, in doc completeness and even REST guidelines. I can see a number of API security warnings that are being popped up to me. So what's great about this tool is it's not just an alarm that's just going to run a siren and say you've done something wrong. Instead, it's going to tell you this is your issue, this is what caused it, and this is the recommendation on how to solve it. So we're giving you all parts of the tool to be able to help you fix, build, and consume better APIs. And what's really great, and it's awesome to see Ann Gentle here in our audience, a leader on our developer relations team, is we've also added that inclusive language check as well. So we can actually look for language that it's things that we're trying to move away from in our technical documentation. As we start to optimize for words like allow list and block list versus some of the antiquated terminology of old. All of this is now available and actually, again, highlighted here. So you can find things like errors in API security, errors that have been introduced through breaking changes, doc completeness, and inclusive language. And again, this is going to help your technical leads. It's also going to help your developers. This tool actually comes with an IDE extension, so that way you can be doing this type of check, not just through a different tool, but directly in the IDE itself. So we have an IDE extension into VS Code. So as a developer is working on the APIs, they can actually do a read on that while they're working in VS Code and see the exact same scorecard and even the recommendations on how to fix it. And this IDE extension is available today. You can go to Microsoft, and it's easy to download and add in to your developer environment. What's more is, through a connection into another open source tool that we have here at Cisco, which is API Clarity, we can also check we always talk about shift left. This is a shift right component, which is our ability to actually see errors in runtime. So now we can actually check drift, and we can see things like shadow or zombie APIs, things that are weakening this API overall. This is a great way to fully score up exactly how your APIs are growing, changing, and when you need to deprecate parts of them properly. So it's a full service tool that allows you to build stronger APIs. And with that, I would recommend anyone that wants to learn more to actually visit our API architect back here, Stev Svarts, Ann Gentle, who is a leader on our developer advocacy team, Ray or myself. We're all going to be in the DevNet zone here at Cisco Live. And thank you all so much. We can't wait to see what you will create with this tool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Right on. Thank you.
So if you want to find out more, you can, of course, scan this code, and it'll take you to that page that he mentioned. I'll pause just a moment and give people a chance to do that. And in, I guess, internet tradition, there is one more thing that I wanted to bring up. We actually have been thinking at Developer Relations, how do we make the life of people who work with Cisco APIs and metrics inside of all of our equipment easier? And we came up with this idea that isn't live yet. It's called the Cisco Metrics Search Engine. That's not an official title. But the idea is that if you're trying to get telemetry data out of Cisco equipment, there might be more than one way to do it. You might have an API, you might have a Yang model, you might have an SNMP MIB file, or you might just have the command line. And if you talk to some of the people who work in network operations centers, and they're trying to figure out, like, what are the right pieces of data that I have to pay attention to? In fact, if you go look at the NOC for the show, you'll see some evidence of that. It may not be in an API, and there may be another way to get that information. And so the idea here is that you could search across all of those things and say, like, I'm just interested in, say, for example, the CPU for wireless access points. And you come up with a bunch of results, and if you found one that was the one you were looking for, you could click on a code button, and you could get a piece of code that would actually allow you to retrieve that piece of data from the equipment. So this is something we think could be very useful to people in the networking space. We're not sure, but we'd love to have your feedback if you think this would be helpful. A lot of times, the sample code that we've been doing for our demonstration for our internally just hits against the sandboxes that we run in DevNet. So again, if you're interested, please go to this URL with this QR code and sign up. We won't use your email for anything other than this. And then once we're done letting people know that it's this come up, we'll get rid of the email address. But while you're there, please leave some feedback on how you might actually use this kind of tool if it existed, because we've got a demo version working internally, but we're thinking about extending it a bit more and then including it on the main developer.cisco.com site. With that, I just wanted to thank you. Please come visit us at DevNet over there on the other side. And you can always, of course, see us at developer.cisco.com. Thank you so much.